Conservators cleaning a 7,000-year-old face in northern Chile found something they were not looking for. The paint was not one coat. It was many, laid down at different times, years apart, by different hands. That single fact quietly dismantles the thing everyone assumes about the ancient dead, that you put them in the ground and walk away. I will come back to what those layers mean. Stand in front of the body itself first, because its shape is already telling you something. There are wooden poles running through the legs. That's why they're straight, unnaturally straight. Look closely and the proportions are wrong in a way your eye catches before your brain does. The head is too smooth, because the skull underneath has been emptied and packed. This is not a body that dried out in the sand by accident. Someone disassembled it, knew exactly what they wanted, and put it back together as something else entirely. The oldest deliberately mummified human being on Earth is not Egyptian. It's a child, found in the Cameroons Valley in Chile, dated to roughly 5,050 years before Christ, about 2,000 years before anyone in Egypt wrapped a pharaoh. 2,000 years. The pyramids were not even an idea yet. And this reorders everything you assume about the ancient world, because the people who made that child were not an empire. Egyptian mummification was a privilege, royalty, priests, the wealthy few. The Chinchorro did it for everybody. Men, women, the elderly, teenagers, newborns, and unborn fetuses. No kings, because there were no kings. No writing, no cities, no metal, no temples. Just fishing families on a thin strip of coast, spending weeks of labor on a single corpse, over and over again, for roughly 3,000 years. That's the part that always gets skipped. So where does something like this even come from? Look at what these people actually had. The far north of Chile, the Atacama coast around the city of Arica. On one side, the Pacific Sea cold, violent, and absurdly rich with fish, seals and sea lions. On the other, the driest non-polar desert on the planet, where some weather stations have never recorded meaningful rainfall. Between the two, a ribbon of survivable land. Fog rolls in off the water most mornings and burns off by noon, and that is close to the entire water cycle. The Chinchorro lived inside that gap for millennia. Barbed harpoons, shell fishhooks, reed mats, cactus spine needles. Their skeletons show ear growths from diving in cold water, worn joints from hauling nets. They were extraordinarily good at exactly one thing, pulling food out of the sea. And they were absolutely obsessed with their dead. That desert already made mummies on its own, for free. The oldest known body from the region, called the Acha man, dates to around 7,000 years before Christ, and it was preserved by nothing but salt, nitrate soil and dry air. Nature had already solved the problem. Roughly a third of all the Chinchorro dead we've recovered were preserved that way, without a single tool ever touching them. Which is where it starts getting strange.
So why would a hunter-gatherer, living in a place where corpses simply do not rot, decide the desert wasn't doing a good enough job? Why strip a body down to bare bone when the sand would have handed it back to you intact? That question sits underneath every single thing you're about to hear, and it has never been answered. What we do have is the procedure itself, recorded in the bodies. And the procedure is stranger than the question. Systematic excavation began in the 1910s, when the German archaeologist Max Uvel started pulling bodies out of the slope beneath the Morro de Arica. Since then, roughly 280 Chinchorro mummies have been documented. One cemetery alone, Morro 1, held 96 individuals, 54 adults and 42 children. In July of 2021, UNESCO put the whole thing on the World Heritage List. And 5 things in those bodies still have no accepted explanation. Ritual 1. The body was completely disassembled. The skin was peeled off in sections and set aside. The head came off. The brain was removed through the base of the skull. Organs out. Flesh scraped away from the bones with stone tools until nothing was left but a skeleton, and then the skeleton was dried, sometimes with hot ash or coals. Everything soft that made this person a person, deliberately destroyed. And that was only half the job. Because then they built the person again. Wooden poles were lashed along the spine, the arms, and the legs, turning the skeleton into a frame. The cavity was stuffed with reeds, feathers, fibers, clay and ash. The muscles were replaced with white ash paste, modeled back into human shape. Then the original skin went back over the top, and where there wasn't enough of it, they patched the gaps with sea lion skin. Finally, black manganese everywhere. But it gets stranger.
Ritual 2. The face. Over the reassembled head they modeled a clay mask, and they left the mouth and the eyes open. Not sealed shut, the way you close a body for burial. Open. Then they painted it. Later generations changed materials. After about 2,500 years before Christ, the black paste gives way to red ochre, and bodies are opened with careful incisions instead of being taken fully apart. The style changes. The open eyes never do. Ritual 3, and this one is the hardest to sit with. They started with the babies. The earliest artificial mummies are overwhelmingly infants, newborns, and miscarried fetuses, bodies the size of your forearm, given the entire treatment. Defleshed. Rebuilt on tiny sticks. Masked. Painted. And in cemetery after cemetery, the children received the most elaborate work of anyone there, more care than the adults. Whatever this was, it did not begin as an honor for the powerful. Ritual 4. The hair. Onto those bald clay heads they fixed wigs of real human hair, thick black hanks of it, some strands up to 60 centimeters long, anchored with a cap of paste. And these figures carry personal marks. One man dated to around 1880 before Christ has a dotted line tattooed above his upper lip, like a mustache, the oldest known tattoo anywhere in the Americas. They weren't making objects. They were making individuals.
Ritual 5, and it reads almost like surrender. In the later stretch of all this, overlapping with the red bodies, some of the dead stop being taken apart at all. Instead they're coated in a thick paste of mud, sand and a binder, fish glue or egg, poured over the entire figure, and sometimes that paste fixed the body to the ground where it lay. Sealed in place, like setting concrete. Same people, same coastline, and a completely different idea of what a corpse is for. And then, around 1700 years before Christ, it just stops. 3,000 years of the most labor-intensive funeral practice in the ancient world, and the Chinchorro simply quit. No invasion in the record. No collapse. No new religion arriving behind an army. The bodies go back to being ordinary burials, and stay that way. That's where every clean explanation runs out, because to explain the ending, you first have to explain the beginning. Nobody can. The strongest theory belongs to Bernardo Ariaza at the University of Tarapaca, and it starts with the water. The rivers feeding the Cameroons Valley run through volcanic rock loaded with arsenic. Today that water still tests at roughly 100 times the level the World Health Organization calls safe to drink. Chronic arsenic poisoning causes miscarriage, stillbirth and infant death. And Cameroons is precisely where the oldest mummified children on Earth were found. It's a beautiful fit, and it still leaves the biggest hole wide open. Poisoned water explains dead babies. It does not explain why grieving parents responded by inventing surgery. Plenty of populations across history have buried plenty of children without ever peeling a body and rebuilding it on a wooden frame. And arsenic doesn't explain why the practice spread to healthy adults and the elderly, why it survived roughly 120 generations, or why it ended. So Ariaza has pushed further. In a study published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal, he argues the mummies were essentially art. The transformed body became a canvas for grief, a way to turn an unbearable loss into something you could stand in front of and look at. Another line of research, led by Pablo Marquez, says the desert taught them. They saw natural mummies in the sand and decided to improve on it. Both are readings. Neither is proof. Over the past couple of decades, some of these mummies have begun turning into black slime. Around 120 of them sit in the museum collection near Arica, and that is what turns this from academic into urgent. Harvard's Ralph Mitchell traced it to ordinary skin bacteria, woken up by rising humidity on a coast that used to be bone dry. 7,000 years of survival, undone by damp air. Keep the room between 40 and 60%, or they're gone. Which brings us back to that detail under the paint. When conservators examine those masks, they find layers, coat over coat over coat, applied at different times. These faces were repainted. Again and again. You do not repaint something you buried. Which means the bodies stayed up, among the living, carried, propped on reed litters, touched up whenever the color faded, for years and maybe generations before anyone finally put them in the sand. In Arica today you can stand on a glass floor and look straight down at them, exactly where they were found. Mouths open. Eyes open.
still waiting for whatever it was they were built to wait for.
What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, smash that like button. See you in the next video.